Hello, it's 10 a.m. on Tuesday, April 14th, 2020, and this is 10 on Tuesdays. I'm Holly Hoffman, your host and the CEO of the Sales and Income Tax Advisory Network. So for the last 8 years, I worked for the Wisconsin Department of Revenue as a field auditor, head of the Wisconsin Department of Revenue Speakers Bureau, and as a technical law specialist. My focus with the Tax Advisory Network is mainly on training and education, in addition to sales tax advisory services. And I absolutely love what I do, so I'm so happy to be able to work directly for your businesses. So welcome. I invite you to join me at 10 every Tuesday for a casual chat about a variety of business topics. We have a Facebook group, 10 on Tuesdays, that I hope you join to suggest topics of interest to you and to further discuss things we talk about on the webinar. At the end of the webinar, I will provide an opportunity. I'll unmute you and you can ask questions if you have any questions, or if there's comments or suggestions on topics you want to provide, you can do that as well. Today's show is about marketplace providers and sellers, and it's a little bit of a follow-up on our discussion last week about managing sales tax registration requirements when you have sales into other states, and I'll kind of tell you in the presentation how that ties in. So my format includes a webinar, so for you to reference. You don't need to follow the slides, but I invite you to grab a cup of coffee, put on your headset or earbuds, do some light work while listening, and then there will also be a recording that you can review afterwards. So if something caught your attention or you need to revisit a topic, you can look at the reference materials on the slides and listen to the information again. All of these recordings are available on the 10 on Tuesdays web channel. To access that, you can go to my website, salesandincometacx.com/event, and you click on any of the 10 on Tuesday events, and there you'll find links to register for 10 on Tuesday webinars. You can get access to the 10 on Tuesday channel, which that's where all the recordings are located. And then also it provides a link to our 10 on Tuesdays Facebook group. So I indicated that today's discussion is about marketplace providers and sellers, and this legislation really came as a result of the Wayfair and economic nexus changes that states have implemented. And marketplace legislation is just a follow-up to that, to adjust for some issues that resulted from the economic nexus changes. So in Wisconsin, the marketplace provider and seller laws went into effect as of January 1st of this year, 2020. And today we're going to talk about what exactly is a marketplace provider and seller, who reports the sales, who collects and remits the sales tax, and who's liable for audit. All really important questions and things that I think more people are affected by this than realize. So really good to get this information out. So first of all, what is a marketplace provider? The statutes actually define what a marketplace provider is, and it basically gives two main criteria. It's a person who lists or advertises for sale taxable products or services by a seller. And the second criteria is the person processes the payment from the purchaser. And this is regardless of whether the person receives compensation or other consideration in exchange for the services provided. So regardless if the marketplace provider has an arrangement where they get a percentage of the sale or any type of payment for their services, a marketplace provider is someone who facilitates the sale of taxable products and services by listing or advertising for sale in any manner, and then who also directly or indirectly processes the payment from the purchaser. So they're the person taking the money from the end customer for whatever they're selling in their marketplace. So the main marketplace providers we think about that come to mind are like Amazon, eBay, Etsy, Walmart Marketplace. I think because we've so long heard the term online marketplace, so we just go right there to those main places. There's lodging marketplaces like Orbitz, Travelocity, Hotel.com, things like that. Groupon's an online marketplace. But then there's other marketplace providers. So if you own a restaurant or a grocery store and you work with food delivery services like DoorDash or Uber Eats, any of those type of delivery services, those delivery services are actually marketplace providers, because think about it, they meet the criteria. They're listing or advertising for sale taxable products or services by a seller, so the food, the restaurant or grocery store food, and then they are also the person who is processing the payment from the purchaser. When they deliver the food, they're taking the payment. Another situation that is a marketplace provider is if you are a business and you host a charity event on behalf of a charitable organization. It's a taxable entertainment event. Maybe you hold a concert to raise money, something like that. You're hosting the event, you're advertising the event, and at the event, you're taking money from the attendees for attendance or for admission. After the event's over, you take all the money, even if you didn't take a cut of it or a percentage or any payment for your services, and you cut a check to the charitable organization, you just fulfilled the criteria of what a marketplace provider is. Not something you would think right offhand when you think about marketplace providers and sellers, but this is definitely a situation where you're acting as a marketplace provider. Other things, it could be a consignment shop or other situations where someone is physically, it doesn't have to be online, but physically selling the goods of others. So consignment shop, they're listing or advertising for sale taxable products, right? And they're collecting payment. So antique shops I've seen where multiple antique sellers, they purchase booths, and the antique shop actually provides that marketplace, provides a person who checks out customers, so the individual booth owners don't have to be there to collect payment. Now, prior to this law, the marketplace provider legislation, the consignment shop wasn't responsible for the sales tax. The actual seller was, as long as the seller was made known to the customers. So this is a change for people. But just keep in mind, it's not just online. This affects in person. It could affect, like I said, the charity event situation. Watch out for it. So we talk about marketplace providers and sellers. So we identified who the provider is. It's the marketplace who's selling the items, who's advertising and taking payment, processing payment. So who is a marketplace seller? This is also specifically defined in the statutes. It's a seller who sells products through a physical or electronic marketplace operated by a marketplace provider. So again, this is stressing that this could be online, electronic marketplace, or it could be a physical marketplace. It's a seller who sells products through a marketplace provider, regardless of whether the seller is required to be registered with the department. And what does that mean? So if I'm selling items, household goods or whatever, occasionally through eBay, very common. It's kind of like having a rummage sale, right? You occasionally sell something. I would not normally be required to register for a seller's permit. I just occasionally sell a few things. I'm not in the business of selling. I'm not selling more than $2,000 a year worth of stuff. So even though I am selling on eBay and I wouldn't normally be required to collect taxes or remit taxes on sales, the marketplace provider is actually considered where the retail sale is occurring. And regardless of the situation that I'm not required to collect, the sales by the marketplace provider are going to be subject to tax. That's where the sale is occurring. So you can be a marketplace seller regardless if you're required to collect tax or not. So walking through some examples of marketplace sellers, I just used the example of if I sell on eBay. I talked earlier about if you are a restaurant or grocery store and you have a delivery service, DoorDash or Uber Eats, something like that, the restaurant or grocery store is the marketplace seller. In the situation of the charity event, the charitable organization is considered the marketplace seller. They're the ones who are receiving the benefits of the sale. In the consignment shop situation or the antique shop, it's the owner of the clothing or antiques being sold. If you are someone who owns property that you rent out on Airbnb or some other type of lodging marketplace, hotel property owner, you're a marketplace seller. The marketplace provider is Airbnb or whatever lodging provider website that you might list your property through. Now, the important thing is this is a big change. Prior to January 1st, 2020, prior to this marketplace provider legislation, it was by a court ruling in a case with Orbitz that lodging providers, online lodging providers, the marketplaces, were not considered selling because they weren't furnishing the lodging, so they weren't required to collect the sales tax. They weren't considered the sellers. This marketplace provider and sellers legislation overturns that ruling. So now all these online lodging marketplaces are required to collect the sales tax. It's not on the property owner, regardless if you, as the property owner, rent enough to be required to collect sales tax or not. If you're listing through Airbnb, Airbnb is listing enough and selling enough that they're required to be registered for a seller's permit and collect and remit the sales tax for sales on your property that they do. So the first question is, who reports the sales? Now, I didn't say sales tax. Who reports the sales? And this is really important. Technically, both the provider and the seller needs to report the sales, unless the seller is an individual who's not required to hold a seller's permit, or maybe the 501c3 doesn't need to hold a seller's permit, then there's no reporting there anyways. But if the seller is a business, say it's a restaurant that is also working through a marketplace provider like Uber Eats, the restaurant is required to hold a seller's permit. They're going to also report the sales. They're going to report it on line 1 to account for total sales. But then the seller is going to report any sales through a marketplace provider on line 3. And what that does is it deducts it out because it is not a taxable sale. It's very similar as when you do sales in other states. So you report total sales, including those sales, on your Wisconsin sales and use tax return. And then you're going to deduct out sales delivered or that occurred in other states because that's not subject to Wisconsin sales tax. So you deduct them out. Who collects and remits the sales tax? Now, this is the party that's liable for the sales tax. The law specifically, this is the whole point of this law, makes the marketplace provider the one liable for the sales tax. They're required by law. There's limited exceptions to collect and remit the sales tax. The marketplace provider is required to collect all applicable local taxes under this law. So it's not just they're required to collect the state sales tax. They're required to collect state applicable county sales tax, premier resort area taxes, room taxes, food and beverage taxes, any taxes that are related to the local district with that sale. Okay, so that's very important. I know some big marketplace providers, so they're all notified or required to notify the seller that they're collecting sales tax. But regardless if they notify the seller or not, if you're selling through a marketplace provider, you as the seller are relieved of your liability to collect the sales tax or these local taxes. But some of these marketplace providers were saying, hey, we don't have the ability, we don't have the technology to collect the local taxes, like room taxes are reported separately. They're not administered by DOR, they're administered by the municipalities. So these marketplace providers were saying, hey, we don't have the ability to collect that. So in their notification to sellers, they specifically stated, we're collecting the sales tax, but we're not collecting any local taxes. And that's your responsibility. But that's not what the law says. And just because that marketplace provider put that in a letter to you as the seller, that doesn't make it legal. So my advice to these restaurants and such who may have gotten letters from Uber Eats or anyone else who's a marketplace seller who received a notification from their provider that the provider isn't collecting certain taxes, that's not legitimate. You are not required, you are not even allowed to volunteer to collect the tax. That is on the provider. So you do not collect any taxes. You report it, like I indicated earlier, you report the sale, you deduct out on line 3 that these sales were through a marketplace provider. Okay. What if you sell through a marketplace provider into other states? So this is why I was talking about, this ties in with last week's topic. Last week's topic was how to manage when to register and start reporting sales tax in other states when you have sales into other states without a physical presence or with a physical presence. So when I was out doing some seminars, I talked to some folks who had done some research prior to January 1st of 2020. And, you know, they were contractors and they had equipment that was old and they couldn't sell. It was in their inventory, it wasn't used. And they thought, hey, wouldn't it be great if I could sell, you know, advertise this nationwide, and maybe someone somewhere needs this equipment and I could get it out of my inventory. Otherwise, you know, it's a loss for me sitting here. But then they looked into it and, well, their equipment was very expensive. So they met the economic threshold just selling 1 or 2 items in a state. And they said, forget it. I mean, it's just not worth it. We can't afford to try to register in these other states and keep up on the sales tax reporting. And then I came out and did a seminar at the beginning of the year, and they were like, wait a minute. So if I advertise this equipment through a marketplace provider, so through an Amazon or an eBay, and there's industry specific marketplaces that you can find for contractors. I've seen them for fishing bait and lures. There's all sorts of marketplace providers out there, industry specific. So if you can find a marketplace provider that works well for your product or your inventory, this might be just the ticket for you of a way to be able to reach customers in other states and avoid having to deal with whether or not you have to register in those states. So again, remember, the marketplace provider is the one who's liable for registering and collecting sales tax. This isn't just a Wisconsin law. This law has been adopted in numerous other states. Pretty much any state that's adopted Wayfair, which is most of them. So if you're selling through a marketplace provider and they're making sales in other states, it's no longer your issue of collecting sales and sales tax on those sales. That would all be through the marketplace provider. So this might be a good option for you if you've visited this idea prior to January 1st of 2020 and thought, oh, it's just not viable for my company. My company's too small. We can't deal with the accounting requirements for sales in other states. Look at this again and look at it through the lens of the marketplace provider situation. Who is liable for audit? So I know we talked about who's liable for the sales tax, but some folks are leery and are like, yeah, but what if I get audited and the marketplace provider didn't pay the sales tax? Am I now stuck paying the sales tax? No, you are not. It's specifically written into the statutes that the marketplace provider is liable for sales tax and is solely liable for audit purposes. So all you need to do as a marketplace seller, again, you report your total sales and you need to report what sales were through the marketplace provider. And of course, keep documentation for that. No different, like I said, than keeping documentation for sales that occurred out of state that are not subject to Wisconsin sales tax, right? So just keep track of what sales were made through the marketplace provider. You as the seller are not liable for the sales tax, not under audit, not under any situation. So I hope today's topic helped you out and maybe gave you some ideas on things that you can do, and maybe this opens up the possibility of sales in other states if you can work through a marketplace provider and that works well for your situation. If you have questions about your specific situation, I know there's lots of follow-up questions for marketplace providers and sellers. If you're a lodging provider and having issues with reporting the local room tax when you're doing some sales through a marketplace provider, let me know. I can help you with those questions. Just contact me at hhoffman@salesandincometax.com, and that email is on our screen right now. Also, all the information I got was from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue, and they have a whole website page dedicated to marketplace providers and sellers, and I provided that link as well on our presentation, just in case you want to look for yourself. And before we go to questions, I just want to let you know a popular topic is sales and use tax audit. So I'm going to do a series starting next Tuesday on sales and use tax audit topics. So just a variety of things: preparing, avoiding audit, managing an audit, things that come up in an audit, common audit adjustments, talk about that. So I will get a list posted of what those topics will be specifically. But if there's something you want to know about, please either email me or join our Facebook group 10 on Tuesdays and post your suggestions there. And now I'm going to unmute you folks. And if anyone has a question or anything that you want to share, you are not unmuted yet. Hang on. Dave and May, you have a question? Well, May, I'm not hearing you. I don't know if you're on mute. I have you off of mute. Oh, does someone have a question or anything they want to add today? All right, well, follow up with me if you have any questions or comments. There is no charge to email me or give me a call and ask a question. I'd be happy to talk with you. Any contact with the outside world is appreciated at this point in our quarantine. So Give me a call if you have questions, and I look forward to talking about sales and use tax audits next week. Thank you guys. Have a great week.